resources that are under the sea then, and of course the marine resources. We have a very, very strong program of capacity building and support for institutional development in the public sector across the range of our developing countries in the Commonwealth. We support administrations in building their public finance capacity, in building institutions that can develop efficient government services. We have also worked with member countries that are endowed with large-scale natural resources to help them extract those resources and manage them prudently and in ways that can preserve the benefit on an intergeneration basis. And the Commonwealth historically has been the catalyst for a number of very, very crucial development policies that have subsequently arrived in a broader international environment. One of these is the multilateral debt relief initiative known as heavily indebted poor country debt relief initiative. That actually came onto the global scene in 1996, and it provided debt relief on a multilateral basis, that is debt write-offs, not only by countries bilaterally with one another, but also multilaterally, particularly through the World Bank and the IMF, to the poorest developing countries and ones with the largest indebtedness. The Commonwealth was at the very center of the initial embryonic conceptualization of that initiative. We've gone much further in many, many other areas. We were the first association to hone in on the unique challenges of small states in the global community. These are countries that are small, that are remote from global markets in trade and in finance, that are deeply vulnerable to changes in policy that occur outside of their environments over which they have no control. They are acutely constrained in terms of capacity, resources, access to international capital. The Commonwealth, over perhaps a 4-decade period, has worked actively to bring to global attention the needs of small states. And as I mentioned earlier, there are 32 small states in the Commonwealth of the 54 member associations. It's a large share of very small countries. Most recently, we've contributed to international programs to help small states. And you may or may not be familiar with some of them, the Barbados Plan of Action for Small States, and about 10 years ago, the Mauritius Strategy for Small Island Developing States. These are not just advocacy programs, but they are programs which help the international decision-making and policy-making institutions such as the Bank, the World Bank and the IMF, and such as the World Trade Organization and others, understand the challenges of these types of countries and then fashion new policies, new financial instruments, new modes of concessionality to try to help those member countries. We've been at the center of these kinds of activities. I think, rather than explain many of the things that we do in development at this stage, let me just point to 4 or 5 key challenges which confront the developing countries of the Commonwealth. And then in doing that, explain a little about what we do, to try to illustrate how we try to go about helping these other countries in this development pillar of work. And the first, most crucial area of challenge for these countries is trade. In the 3 years before the global crisis, the small states of the Commonwealth, these 32 countries I mentioned, had on average a growth rate of 3%, positive growth rate. Then came the crisis, and they lost 13%. Sorry, I'm an economist, I dropped out the numbers, but hopefully some of this makes a little bit of sense to someone who doesn't care for economics, and I don't blame you if you don't. 13% of their trade to the large markets of the world, OECD markets, was lost during the crisis. And because of that, they lost over 4% of growth. They had an average, positive average of 3%, and trade reduced, and they lost 4%. So collectively, they went into negative growth just because they lost their access to trade markets. Now, when trade resumed, another vulnerability emerged, which is that those that are smallest and weakest and spend an awful lot of time getting into international trade suddenly lose their markets, even temporarily. They suddenly find that trying to recover it is yet another Herculean exercise. And so we find today that the small countries of the world are far behind in the recovery as a result of their inability to regain their markets in trade. That's an illustration of the vulnerability in trade. Now recently, and I think you have a little sheet talking about the value of intra-Commonwealth trade, and I think perhaps in discussion just before this meeting started, I had a sense that one of the interesting facets of the Commonwealth is that it seems to have some kind of a trade advantage. That within the Commonwealth there's an extra dollop of trade going on. And so being part of that club might be quite helpful for anyone, any country that might want to be part of that club. Now, we've done some analysis of intra-Commonwealth trade very, very recently, taking into account the data after the crisis, so including 2009 data. And we found, in a nutshell, that Commonwealth trade has been growing, and I can trot out more data, but perhaps I'll give it to you in a sheet. I'll email it to you, Robin, and we can circulate if you wish. Trade in the Commonwealth has been growing. Trade between the Commonwealth and the rest of the world has been growing at a reasonable pace. But trade within the Commonwealth has been most desperately needed and is most clearly seen in the types of trade between the smaller Commonwealth members and the larger ones. So, in a sense, what I'm saying is that there is a trade advantage in the Commonwealth. It may not be as high as the headline figure, 50% or 70%, whatever it might be. There's a discernible advantage, but the figures need to be looked at in a more nuanced way to understand who is most reliant in those intra-Commonwealth trade relationships. There is clearly an advantage, and for those that would try to exercise that advantage, there is certainly a benefit. But the numbers need to be carefully looked at and nuanced. A second major challenge for Commonwealth member countries who are poor or small or developing is their indebtedness. Again, perhaps this strikes a resonant chord in one way, although the types of countries are entirely different. Thank you. Robin, I was told that when I come here, there's a different type of liquid that's very, very nice, and perhaps afterwards. The smaller, poorer countries of the Commonwealth experienced the global crisis directly. The transmission effects came straight into their economies, the real sectors of their economies. They were not hit by the financial crisis, weak financial sectors, etc. However, one consequence of the hit in the real sector was, for many countries that had just got access to international capital, the smaller, weaker ones in the Commonwealth, they suddenly found access to international capital either truncated completely, stopped, or the cost of borrowing extremely high in comparison with the pre-crisis period. And they've been suffering as a consequence with their indebtedness and their solvency ratios or insolvency ratios climbing significantly. And so a key challenge for them, if they are to resume growth and to get back to the ability to have several years of growth, and then extricate themselves from poverty and grow and globalize and reach global markets. Key challenge is to try to find modalities to wind down this debt. Their problem is that they are not, their per capita income is above the international thresholds, which are set by the international institution, debt sustainability framework thresholds. What we're doing is to try to interrogate how those thresholds are arrived at and to put forward useful, practical ways of trying to identify and isolate the challenges of what are effectively, in per capita terms, middle-income countries in the Commonwealth, but which are desperately poor. Their income distribution is very skewed. So that they can either be assisted in reducing the stock of their existing debt, or be helped going forward in reducing their unsustainable debt build-up on an ongoing basis. And we've come up with several innovative proposals, and we're working with the World Bank particularly to try to put forward these views on behalf of collectively on behalf of the Commonwealth, to try to find a way through that. There are other challenges in the Commonwealth. I mentioned the challenge of small states. And one of the things that we've been doing recently to try to help small states is to move to a second generation of work. The previous generation of work was saying small states are vulnerable. International community, hear this message, and when you do, you'll create new instruments, new financing methods, you'll look at the world of small states in a different way, and you'll react internationally to address their needs. Now we are saying that body of work is established. It is part of international settled understanding of small states that they are inherently vulnerable. They can't wish their vulnerabilities away. They're just small. They're miles away from markets and so on. What we can do actively is to build their resilience, so that when a crisis comes, whether it's food or fuel or energy, security, climate crisis, economic crisis, financial crisis, they are not hit so badly that they simply have to pick themselves up and start all over again. They build resilience. And the Commonwealth, just very recently, in the last 3 years, has developed an index of resilience, which does a number of things. It monitors progress. It identifies the gaps in